And we kept our house and our cars until they were able to go back to school and get their teaching certificates and become educators. Not many people in that situation today would be able to sustain themselves and pull themselves up as well as my parents were able to. My parents, who are retired now, worked as educators for over 20 years. My mother was a math teacher and my father was a science teacher, which means I like English and history. Sorry, Terry.
Oh, that's not. I like history
Terry
too.
likes history.
Watching my parents over the years, I saw how much they loved their jobs and how much they cared about their students. I watched the extra effort that they put in, developing lesson plans and coming up with new ways to explain concepts and to engage students. I watched them spend their own money to ensure that the students coming into their classrooms were successful and had what they needed. Having both my parents as teachers has given me insight into just how much our public school educators do and care for our children. It also provided me with much needed support when at 17, I was diagnosed with cancer. It had started small. One day after a cross-country meet in the fall, I noticed what I thought was just a pimple. However, after being misdiagnosed twice, by the time December rolled around, that pimple had grown to the size of a golf ball. I went in to have the majority of that tumor removed just after Christmas in 2001. And within days, my parents got the phone call that no parent ever wants to hear. A doctor on the other end of the line telling them that their child, their only daughter, had cancer. My father is a 2-time cancer survivor himself, so he knew just what was at stake. Somehow he took the call and turned around and had to answer my first question, whether I was going to die. He was able to get through it and tell me that I would be fine, and I never doubted him. 2 months later, I was done with chemo, but I had lost all my hair, the reflexes in my legs, and a lot of my strength. However, I learned the value of determination and what it can do from watching my parents overcome their job loss and the adversities of their lives, and I was determined not to let that slow me down. I went on to college at Auburn University, where I began running again, and 4 years later, I completed a marathon. Don't get too excited, I've only done it once. After graduating from college, I went on to law school at the University of Alabama School of Law, where I promptly aged out of the good insurance I had through my parents' work as educators. When I aged out of my parents' insurance, at that time, protections didn't exist for people who had pre-existing conditions to protect us from discrimination by the healthcare industry. Because I was a cancer survivor, the only policy that I was able to afford was one which didn't cover sick visits or yearly checkups. And ultimately, it kept me from the care that I needed to remain healthy, or which would have allowed me to catch my cancer had it returned within that time. And I was lucky. I was lucky, again, because my cancer didn't come back. And now I'm covered through my husband's employer. But I realize how lucky and how blessed I've been at every step of the way throughout my life. I also recognize that the safeguards which were there for me in my life, the good health insurance which enabled me to catch my hearing loss and to fight cancer, the good public schools which enabled me to pursue a college degree and a law career, and the good opportunities which have enabled me and my husband to pursue and create jobs in our chosen profession, those safeguards are missing for too many Alabamians. Too often we see politicians who fail to consider the impact that their actions could have on their communities before proposing legislation, and who look for the quick and easy answer rather than the correct one. Too often we see politicians who are either unable or unwilling to have a dialogue with the other side of the aisle and to come up with new and creative solutions to the problems which face us. And too often we see politicians who view politics not as a way to serve their communities, but as a team sport where political points matter more than the needs of their constituents, and where grabs for power, regardless of the outcome, are becoming more and more blatant. We have seen each of these things in this current legislative session. We've seen them in a knee-jerk bill to bring more guns into our classrooms by arming teachers. In bills which would put additional barriers to assistance upon the poorest and most vulnerable among us. And in a bill which removes the power of the people to fill U.S. Senate vacancies.
That's right.
But the problem goes much deeper than that. It has gotten to the point that I believe it threatens the ability of Alabamians to achieve the American dream. In 1776, our nation declared its independence, and we affirmed our belief that all men have certain unalienable rights. Come on, you guys know these with me. That we are endowed with the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I believe that if written today, it's entirely possible that the Declaration of Independence could read that we are endowed with the rights to health care, opportunity, and education.
That's right.
Because they are equal concepts. Without health care, we have no life. Without opportunity, we're not free to profit from our own labor. And without education, we don't have the ability to pursue our dreams.
That's right.
These three things, these three values, are the pillars upon which the American dream is based, and upon which countless Alabamians, including my family, have relied to pull themselves out of hard times. Despite the importance of these values, the U.S. News and World Report ranks Alabama as 47th in terms of the quality of our education. CNBC ranks us 48th in terms of our economy. And on average, AL.com recently reported that Alabamians pay more for health insurance than Californians. So how did we get here? That's a question that I've often asked myself over the past couple months. And then I noticed something one day as I was watching my daughter. I have a 3-year-old daughter named Ruth Grace. And she was starting to pick at a patch on one of her toys. It's a blue stuffed tiny little teddy bear named Mr. Teddy. As I said, she's 3, so one of her favorite things to do is to take her toys apart. She's not really trying to destroy them. She just kind of wants to see how they work and what's going to happen if she continues to push them or bang them on things. And sometimes I'm able to fix them, even after she breaks them. But even after they're fixed and I give them back to her, she'll ignore the glue or the stitches or whatever I've managed to hobble them together with and continue to pound on her toys. Because they're fixed. They work well enough for her. And she doesn't realize that with a little more chipping or a little more tearing or a little more pulling, they could break forever. In part, that's how it works with the safeguards created by our laws. When the safeguards that we have protecting our healthcare, education, or opportunity work well enough for us, we forget all of the things that underpin them and which allow them to function as intended. We ignore the fact that those safeguards don't always work for others. And we allow the chipping away of those safeguards until they get to a point where they finally no longer work for any of us. We owe this slow deterioration of our values, however, not only to complacency, but also to a fundamental error in how we have come to expect our government to function. All you have to do today is turn on social media, Facebook or Twitter, to see that we have become a society which focuses on ideology first and value second. Former President Barack Obama notes this disparity between ideology and values in his book, The Audacity of Hope. He explains that although we use both ideology and values as ways to try and address the problems that face our society, when we lead with our values, we're able to apply those values to the facts before us. But when we lead with our ideology, often it overrides the facts that we have and clouds our judgment. As a result, we have a political climate which has become more and more divisive and more liable to put ideology of the prevailing party over the hard reality of facts. When we begin from a position of ideology rather than values, we ignore the facts and risk damaging those things which create a society that functions. With every decision or piece of legislation which serves ideology rather than values, we put another chip in the safeguards that protect our healthcare, our education, and our economy. So how do we fix it? The answer is both exceedingly easy and impossibly hard. We have to listen to each other. We have to acknowledge the pain of a family who has chosen between bankruptcy and healthcare for their adult child, even though we have good insurance ourselves. We have to try to understand the pressures on families to make ends meet during an unexpected job loss. And we have to try and understand the regulations which make it harder for small businessmen to compete and establish new enterprises in our communities. But there is a reason that ideology so often wins out over values. There is a favorite quote of mine recently, and that is this, that hurt people hurt people. When people are hurting or scared about them or their children's futures, ideology can often offer a soundbite solution to our problems and make them feel more surmountable or more palatable than they so often feel. In my own life, I have had well-meaning friends suggest that because they were afraid they might become unable to afford their own health insurance, that the reasonable thing to do would be to return to a system which does not have protections for expensive people like me. They were hurting. They were scared. And they were worried about how they were going to provide for their family. They forgot our shared values, that we all want to be healthy and none of us want unreasonable barriers to our health. They relied on ideological soundbites which vilified people who were different and forgot that there might be a way forward for us all. As a one-time divorce attorney, I can tell you how hard it is to put yourselves in the shoes of another person, especially somebody that you don't see eye to eye with. But I know that it can be done. I've done it with those friends of mine who I just spoke to you about. And I've seen parents in bitter custody battles do the same thing and put the good of their children first ahead of their own agendas, because they each want their children to do well. In our polarized world of political discourse, it can be easy to forget that we share values. And at times it seems that sometimes the other side has forgotten we share them at all. We all want our children to be healthy. We all want them to have a good education and the opportunity to succeed. Like parents in a custody case, we're often so blinded by our own agendas and how we see things that we forget how we're alike. But it's only when we listen to each other we can remember why we are there in the first place and begin to work towards the common ground needed to improve the problems facing our society. We need politicians who are willing to listen. I am willing to listen. And as an attorney for almost a decade, I have the background in interpreting law and working with opposing viewpoints to help guide us towards the solutions that will help our state rather than hurt it. But listening alone isn't enough. We also need to send people to Montgomery who have realistic plans for how we can tackle the issues facing our district, and who likewise have a realistic view about how fast we can expect significant change to occur. It's all too easy for some politicians to get up here, promise you the moon, and often that's persuasive because it sounds good. It's what we want to hear. We too are tired, we're frustrated, and we're hurting, and we want to hear that change is coming now. But that ignores the reality of the facts before us and allows our ideology to eclipse those facts rather than applying our values to them. The issues facing us today, such as what to do about our education system, didn't arise overnight. And we shouldn't expect to fix them overnight or by sending a mere one more person to Montgomery. We also have to be cognizant about the makeup of our government. Currently, we have one party with a supermajority. And although we can and absolutely should be working towards a better balance of power, we have to acknowledge that while the supermajority remains, in order to be effective, the Democrats that we send to Montgomery must be able to work with the other side and find our common values to reach points of consensus. Sorry, guys. All right. I also believe that we need to send Democrats to Montgomery who look at issues in a multifaceted and holistic way, rather than boiling our issues down to sound bites. Sound bites may sound good, they may sound easy, but they aren't reality. That's why my campaign is dedicated to looking at multiple ways to tackle the important issues facing District 2 and to work towards consistent and steady progress over time to reach each of them. Some of the campaign, obviously I need more Monster. Don't worry, I'm going to drink the rest of it. Some of the way my campaign will work to better the lives of our constituents are by addressing education in a comprehensive way. Not only are we going to work towards more transparency in our education budget and how we're using our education trust fund, but we're going to work towards ensuring that when our teachers get pay raises, those pay raises aren't canceled out by corresponding increases in their insurance.
That's one of my things. That's right.
We are going to support birth to pre-K programs to allow our students the best chance of success.
That's right. That's right.
We are going to acknowledge that over the past decade, we've asked our teachers to do more with less, and we've put upon them the responsibility of tackling issues which had previously been addressed in the home and which we have not equipped them to deal with. We are going to look at how we can mitigate some of that, and we are going to look for new ways and methods of funding education, including allowing cities to choose to invest in their own children's futures. And a lottery for higher education so that Alabama children have the same opportunities as children in Georgia or Tennessee. With respect to healthcare, we're going to look at ways to expand Medicaid and to ensure that any legislation that comes out of Montgomery does not carve out pockets of vulnerable uninsureds. We are also going to look at better transparency in terms of our health insurance industry. With infrastructure, we're going to look at ways to improve and fund our infrastructure that are the least burdensome on our constituents and are the most reliable, and to ensure that the tax dollars that we send to Montgomery are coming back to North Alabama in the same way that tax dollars come to Montgomery or Birmingham to fund their infrastructure programs. So in closing, I want to leave you with a vision of what this slow progress hopes to achieve. A vision of the Alabama that ultimately I want for my daughter and I want for all of our children. When I think of the Alabama I want for my daughter, I think of a state where all children are able to go to good, well-funded public schools, run by teachers who are fairly compensated. A state which has the infrastructure necessary to support the growth needed to build businesses and opportunities, so our children will have a job. And a state where my child, regardless of her success in life or any unfortunate medical scenarios which may befall her, will have basic access to quality health care. In short, I want a state, and I will work towards a state that ensures all of our children have the benefit of the safeguards that I was lucky enough to take advantage of. That is why I'm running for State Senate District 2. But I can't do it alone. I need your support. Not only do I need your financial support, but I need your time, your resources, and yes, I need your vote in the Democratic primary on June 5th. Mark it down. If you don't, I'll consistently remind you about it. I'm a lawyer, I'm not kidding.
Okay.
With your support, though, together we can begin to create the kind of state that we want for our children. One where their future, unlike mine, will no longer be dependent on luck.
That's right.
Thank you all so much for your time.